Hey guys, so episode 3 of Feud aired last night, and Mommy Dearest it was indeed. So we actually get more of a look at their personal lives, Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. We actually see what it's like with their children, we see them interact with them. We've seen Bette Davis's child, BD, but we haven't seen Joan interact with her children, so it was actually really interesting to see the comparisons. They both actually really struggled as mothers. And so Joan actually adopted, I think, all of her children, at least most of them. I'm not positive, so bear with me on my uh, facts here. So the thing is, most of her children were already grown up by this point. So she's kind of dealing with the fact that they're no longer at the house, or they're not at the house as often as they were. But Joan's really dealing with being alone because she's not married at this point, and she's dealing with her failing career. Even though she's working on a film, there's still the uncertainty if it's going to be a success or not. So we actually see a real, true moment of Joan here, where she's relating her fears that are very understandable. And one thing I like about the show is that even though we see the phoniness of Hollywood and everything, we actually do have scenes where we see the real people, their emotions, their fears, and all of that, and that really makes them real. And I like that the show balances that, the phoniness versus what's real. So, yeah, I definitely like the element of the show with that. To talk about some points of the show, what happens is Bette Davis and Bob Aldrich, who's the director, they had a little affair, and Bette thinks they should call it off, and Bob agrees with her. And Bob also thinks that her daughter would be great for the role of the neighbor, because that was in the last episode, they wanted this young, beautiful woman who was playing the neighbor to be fired, so now it's going to be BD. And Betty's not sure about it, and we actually have a scene where we see BD reading the lines, and she's not so... I want to be nice here. She's just not as good as one would expect. But the thing is, she does actually end up doing the film, and I actually checked. She was in the movie under the name Barbara Merrill, I believe. And so I actually thought she wasn't going to be in the movie, and that was going to be Bette Davis's doing, but thankfully that didn't happen. But we actually see BD not really fighting with her mother in this episode, which is nice. But we kind of see them... BD's actually kind of neglected a little bit. At one point, Bette Davis is talking to Victor, who's the leading man. He's... they're talking about being a mother, and she says that you should love your children and all that. And literally right after she says that, BD walks in and says, I need help with my lines, and Betty's like, oh, you should go get your beauty rest if you're worried about everything, and she kind of neglects her in that moment. So, a little hypocritical on Betty's part. But, okay, so this is all just based on if this is true. So Bette was hypocritical, she wasn't always 100% a mother to her child, but at the same time you see kind of why. She has another daughter, we learn. Her name's Margot. She kind of she's a special needs child, and she's off at some kind of school or institution. And at one point, Bette calls her, and she really wants to see her child, but it's a difficult relationship because it's not easy. like, I can't really speak for it, but I have an understanding that it's just very hard being a mother to somebody who has special needs, and this is actually what we see Betty dealing with, and it's just a lot of moments where we're seeing them struggling being mothers, and especially single, and that was not easy at that time. It still isn't easy, but it was just a new frontier at the time, really. Like, even then. But, so yeah, she's dealing with that, and meanwhile, we're kind of seeing the feud itself. Like, Joan is still telling lies to Hedda Hopper, and she's just constantly trying to bring Betty down in a way. And during the filming, it was actually a funny montage. They're finding ways to drive each other crazy. Like, at one point, Bette Davis's character has to drag off Joan Crawford's character, and Joan just kept laughing. It was kind of funny, but she was doing it purposefully to ruin the take, I'm sure. And another point, like, Bette Davis has to kick a dummy, and she just keeps kicking the dummy that clearly she's placing her feelings on it for Joan, just constantly kicking at it. And at one point she actually has to pretend to kick Joan, and that ends up, well, it ends up with a quick, swift kick in the head. And Joan is very upset about that, and I thought that was actually going to be a bigger deal, but it was just part of the montage. And then Joan kind of gets back at her at another point where, like, Bette Davis is carrying her again, and she notes how heavy Joan was. And it actually wasn't that Joan was heavy, it's that she actually put weights around her waist. So, if any of this is true, that part was actually kind of funny. Not that no one should do that, just... Not that anyone should do that, just don't... For a TV show, it's funny. That's where I'm gonna leave that. Because it's not nice to fight guys. Anyway. To get back to the show, so we're basically seeing Bette Davis kind of warming up to Victor, and they kind of have more of a friendship, which is nice. And by the end of the episode, Joan actually wants to adopt again. And I don't remember if she does or not, because I can't keep track of all the things I read. So yeah, she's looking into adopting, and it's going to be interesting to see if she does. And they actually wrap up the filming. And I actually thought that was going to last longer. But I learned today that there's a film, again, I think it was directed by Bob Aldrich. It's called, what's it called? Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, I believe. I actually learned that, so this was another movie similar to Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but it's not, I don't think it's related exactly, but Bette Davis is in it. And so I read that it was actually going to be, like, Joan Crawford was going to be in it, but then she got ill or something. So Olivia de Havilland actually took the role opposite Bette Davis. So that kind of explains how Olivia de Havilland is in the interviews and everything that they've shown, which we actually didn't see that this episode, but in the previous 2 episodes. So yeah, that makes sense how that would be related to that. So I can imagine she saw some aspects of the feud that way. So it'll be very interesting to see all things that happened in real life go into the show. Like, I'm positive they're going to show the Oscars. I guess that's like going to be a whole episode. Because I mentioned in my last video, there was a thing where Bette Davis was nominated for Best Actress, Joan Crawford was not. And another actress ended up winning, But I think Joan, she made like a deal with at least that actress. I think she might have made a deal with the others. I'm not positive. But if they were not present at the Oscars, then she could take the award for them and give a speech. And I'm positive that was Joan's way of spiting Bette Davis if she didn't win. So that's going to be an interesting episode. So yeah, not not too much went down, but definitely a lot of tension. Still seeing a lot of aspects of single mothers and single women in general trying to have a career, trying to keep everything the way it was, and it gets harder when you get older, especially back then. There were hardly any roles for women at that age, and just a lot to contemplate with Hollywood all the time. So yeah, I'm going to leave it here, and we'll see what happens in the next episode. It looks like more tension, as usual. So yeah, I will talk to you guys later. Have a good night. Bye.